What is going on? We're going to get into some dorky computer science concepts today, and I'm going to tell you the story about how I designed and built this automation for a coaching program that I'm a part of called Client Ascension. So this is going to be a really interesting case study for the dorks out there, the super nerds out there, all my homies that are into math. And basically where we're going is if you have a complex scenario, this is going to be really interesting. So fundamentally, let me walk you through the case study, the automation application, and then you'll see how this applies to a few different scenarios. So we have a 300 plus student coaching program, and the onboarding automation what they needed was when a student joins Slack, like signs a contract, they sign Slack, they are assigned to a student success coach, which, there's one of 4 right now, and they get put in a, private Slack channel and team Slack channel for SSC, and they get a welcome email. All right. So this seems like really simple on the surface, but when you start actually thinking through what this needs to do, it starts to get interesting. So we have a student success coach. We need to dynamically assign the least utilized student success coach. So I'll talk about that part. We have a case where there's multiple business partners signing the contract. It's one contract, and then the people join maybe through the same domain, maybe through different domains, separately to Slack, and they're different Slack users. And we have to deal with that and group them together. Okay? We also have the private Slack channel for the student, and in that private Slack channel we have to add all of the coaches, but you also have to add only the correct student success coach and this welcome email as well. We have this case where we need to add all of the coaches to the email, right? But we can't just make this email like a straight template because we have to dynamically insert the correct student success coach, right? So we need to handle a few different cases. We need to handle a different Slack email. So if a student signs a contract with email 1 and their Slack email is like email 2, we have to handle that scenario automatically. We have to handle different business partners, as I mentioned. We have to handle people with the same name, right? So that the Slack API will fail if you have 2 channels that are the same name. And of course, dynamic balancing. So how do we do this without going insane? The way that we do this is with a computer science concept called a subroutine. Right? A subroutine, and I promise I will show you all of the details, but let me explain what it is. A subroutine is a reusable block of code, and you can either call that code from one place and from like 3 different places, and it just continues, or you can call it and get information back and continue on your merry way in the main part. So let me first illustrate what it is, and then you'll start to see these applications. This video will be especially relevant, of course, if you have a massive coaching program, or if you have a large business of any kind and there's a workflow where there's like lots of, you got to check this, but then also sometimes that, and this has to handle too, and this and this and this and this and this. You want to architect your automations in the right way, otherwise you will literally go insane. So computer science people have been figuring this stuff out for a long time. The no-code thing is like relatively new, but we can look to computer science concepts for this. So subroutines. Let me illustrate what it is. All right, so we have scenario 1, and where's my water? Never mind, I'm thirsty. Okay, so we have scenario 1. And let's say at the end of scenario 1, we want to maybe do the same next step, and the next step is standard, but we have a few different scenarios or a few different cases in scenario 1 that could lead to scenario 2, right? You have heard of the concept of webhooks. Now, a webhook is normally what you think of as a webhook is you sign up for a third-party thing like Calendly or Instantly or whatever else, and then once an event happens over there, they send you a webhook, right? You're probably used to the concept of like receiving a webhook. You can also create your own webhooks. So I have scenario 3, and over here in scenario 3, I'm receiving a webhook, right? I can receive this from anywhere. The way that you would call this is by creating your own HTTP post request in scenario 1. So in scenario 1, you can do this. You can do the exact same thing in Zapier. You can do the exact same thing in Make. You pass in the URL, which is this one here. So you do this. You would do a post, and you'd pass in the query string the values. So like for example, I have value 1 and value 2, and this is 5 and this is 44. I can make this, I don't know, 7. Then what you do is that goes into scenario 2, and scenario 2, as an example, just takes value 1 and adds it to value 2, and then returns the results. So for example, if I run this scenario now, you'll see the query string 7 and 44, and so this parses the results. We get 51 as the results, right? And the status is okay, and we can do some other stuff. Right? So that's how this works, right? We can get a webhook from create a webhook in scenario 1, pass information to scenario 2. If we want to, we can also return information back to scenario 1. Let me show you the real life example of this in Client Ascension. So we have one step where, this is pretty simple. The student, we get a webhook from their Zapier account. We split this up. If there's multiple first names, multiple last names, multiple emails, we split that up into an array, create the first record, and then assign the other records as like linked to the first record. Pretty simple. Okay, cool. Moving on. So the next step is this onboarding step 2, where the student joins Slack. Now, let me show you this architecture here. So the student joins Slack, and we send the Slack welcome message to everybody. And the next thing we do is we say, well, who is this person, right? Is this person, we need the first name, the last name of this person. We need to know that they were a student, that they actually signed the PandaDoc, and we need to link business partners together. So the first thing we do is we try to find an email address in Airtable for this person. Right? We assume that hopefully the email from Slack and the email from the PandaDoc is the same email. So that's the first thing we do. If we find an email there, we pass a webhook from scenario 2, from this module, all the way over to scenario 3. Right? If we don't, what we do is we do the, we get the user information from Slack. We try to match the name. So if the email is different, maybe the name is the same. Okay? We try to find an exact match on the name, and so that goes on to this module right here. And if we find a match between the name on the Slack user and Airtable, again, we update the record, we update the Slack email in the record, and then we go on to the next step in the next scenario here. And that is, again, the same. This webhook here is the same webhook as over here, and that's the same webhook as over here. All right, cool, huh? So it's reusable. Think of this as like a reusable chunk of code that we don't have to rewrite every single time. All right. If there's no match with the name, then we look for the email address. All right. So we try to match the first part of the email address, as long as it's not like a Gmail or a Hotmail or whatever. And again, if we find a match here, we update the Slack email and we pass on to the next scenario. And if nothing else happens, we try to see if there's somebody else with the same domain, that's like agency name number1.com. If there's other people with the same agency name, we assume they are all linked together, and then we move on from there. So that's how we do that. Again, so now we're at step 3. Now, step 3 also has different cases. So we on step 3, we're creating the private channel in Slack. Now, it mostly succeeds. So far, it's succeeded all the time, but we could have a case where there's somebody with a very common name, like John Smith. And so what we do in scenario 3 is we first try to create the private channel. If it works, we go to number 4. But if it doesn't work because the name is taken or the name is too long, Then if it's taken, we try to see if the student is the same person, if they've joined in the last week and it's a duplicate somehow. Or if the name is too long, like someone has an insanely long name, that's never happened before, but it will, the Slack API will fail, and so we also handle that case as well. All right? So that's how we're like taking reasonable chunks of code and like piecing them together, but we only have to create the code once, and we can maintain it and update it once, and it kind of updates everywhere because one thing is passing information to the next thing. Cool, huh? Okay. Then the last step is assigning the student success coach. So if you have an application where you have like a project manager and the project manager is taking a project and assigning it to a person, or you're doing some kind of like distribution of work, this is a really interesting application. So what I'm doing here, let me show you this one. Okay. So again, I'm getting information from the previous scenario. Okay. I get information from the previous scenario that says, hey, add this student to like make the channels made for this student, figure out the student success coach and add everybody to Slack. So we get the student record, and then this part here, this student success coach record, what we're doing is we're getting one record, we're ordering it by a ranking, and we're returning that record and updating the student record with the chosen student success coach. Now, how do we do this? We do this in Airtable because every student is linked to one success coach record, which is coming from over here, right? And we have an Airtable function that allows us to count up the number of linked records under certain conditions. So over here, this is an Airtable function. This is built in, you can copy this. So over here, we count up the number of active students. So we get every record from the student table where the payment status is okay and the end date is after today's date. All right? So if the student has basically passed, if today is after the student's end date, they no longer count against the active load of the student success coach, and that's how we dynamically assign that. Now, this is the same mechanism, this mechanism of like linking two things in Airtable together to decide between different freelancers. If you have like a video editing agency and you want to dynamically assign this, I have another client who is a content agency. They have about 50 to 80 writers, and so I'm using the exact same mechanism here with a bit more calculation, but the same mechanism to automatically assign a project to the best writer. So if you have something like that, you have a large agency, you have a massive team, you can use the same mechanism to dynamically assign the task as it's coming in to the right person, as long as this calculation is optimal. So let's see. Okay, so we do that, and then the next thing, this is pretty simple, right? So we're taking all the coaches. We're adding everybody to Slack, right? So we're adding all the Slack user IDs, and we're to that array of Slack user IDs, we're also adding the chosen student success coach to that array. And then we invite the student and we send them a welcome message and whatever else. And then we also send this same information in a formatted email. So again, the student gets, it's just like aggregating. This is, the name and their role and the description for the welcome email. So we're chunking these all together into one single email that says, hey Dave, welcome to Client Ascension. Here's all of the coaches that's dynamically assigned or dynamically populated from Airtable, and here is your student success coach. So that is how that all works. I hope that you guys enjoyed this delightful tutorial on computer science dorky stuff. There's a couple other applications of subroutines. So one of them is, as you saw, was like failure handling. So try this way, and if there's no match on this way, try this other way. That's one. The other piece I showed you is the demo of, in this little demo, is reusable chunks of code. So, I have this for like doing page counts. So what's the dynamic load of the project? based on page count, word count, spacing, like all these different factors. So I've created some reasonable chunks, which is quite handy. And then the last application that's really handy is if you have automations that like have to log into client stuff and like submit an article or do something where you're logging into client 1, client 2, client 3, client 4, client 5, rather than creating copies of your entire automation and your entire scenario. What you do is you create subroutines, one subroutine for every client. In that subroutine, you have just the webhook receiver and you do your logic, and then you store the webhook address for each client in Airtable. So as your automation is going through, you have one standard block of code. You go through and you get the webhook address for where it's passed to from Airtable so it can distribute to the right subroutine dynamically as well. So that is how you do it. I hope you enjoyed this extremely dorky, autistic video. If you want more, subscribe, like, whatever you people do on the internet is cool with me. What I do is I have an engineering background, as you can probably tell by this video. Worked with some rather large kind of billion-dollar CPG companies in terms of doing their automation for their actual factories and their product conveyors and things like that. And so if you want to learn more about how to automate your business and do so without pulling your hair apart, you can subscribe to this video and things like that. If you want to book a call with me, if you have a fairly large business, you want to book a call and move some things along, I will drop a link to that below this video. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions on subroutines in code, you can apply this. This applies for Zapier. This applies for Python. This applies for Make. This applies for any no code or code program. You can build this infrastructure in. It's really handy. So that is it. I'm a dorky computer guy, not a YouTuber, as you can tell. So I'm gonna just awkwardly trail off this video and leave it at that. And you can do what you want to do. Have a good day, guys.